Section 11 of the Oakdale Affair by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The cases hung open-mouthed upon his words, while his companions wondered at the loquaciousness of this ordinarily closed-mouthed man, who, as a matter of fact, was but attempting to win the confidence of the boy on the chance that even now he had not told all that he knew, but Willie had told all. Finding after a few minutes' further conversation that he could glean no additional information, the detective returned to his car and drove west toward Millsville on the assumption that the fugitives would seek escape by the railway running through that village. Only thus could he account for their turning off the main pike. The latter was now well guarded all the way to Payson, while the Millsville road was still open. No sooner had he departed than Willie Case disappeared, nor did he answer at noon to the repeated ringing of the big farm dinner bell. Halfway between the Case farm and Millsville, Detective Burton saw, far ahead along the road, two figures scale a fence and disappear behind the fringing blackberry bushes which grew in tangled profusion on either side. When they came abreast of the spot, he ordered the driver to stop, but though he scanned the open field carefully, he saw no sign of living thing. "There are two men hiding behind those bushes," he said to his companions in a low whisper. "One of you walk ahead about 50 yards, and the other go back the same distance and then climb the fence. When I see you getting over, I'll climb it here. They can't get away from us." To the driver he said, "You have a gun. If they make a break, go after 'em. You can shoot if they don't stop when you tell them to." The two men walked in opposite directions along the road, and when Burton saw them turn in and start to climb the fence he vaulted over the panel directly opposite the car. He had scarcely alighted upon the other side when his eyes fell upon the disreputable figures of two tramps stretched out upon their backs and snoring audibly. Burton grinned. "You two sure can go to sleep in a hurry," he said. One of the men opened his eyes and sat up. When he saw who it was that stood over him he grinned sheepishly. "Can't a guy lie down for a minute in these bushes without being pinched?" he asked. The other man now sat up and viewed the newcomer, while from either side Burton's companions closed in on the three. "What's the noise?" inquired the second tramp, looking from one to another of the intruders. "We ain't done nothin'." "Of course not, Charlie," Burton assured him gaily. "Who would ever suspect that you or the General would do anything? But somebody did something in Oakdale last night, and I want to take you back there and have a nice, long talk with you. Put your hands up." "We—" "Put 'em up," snapped Burton, and when the four grimy fists had been elevated he signaled to his companions to search the two men. Nothing more formidable than knives, dope, and a needle were found upon them. "Say," drawled Dopey Charlie, "we knows what we knows, but honest to Gawd, we didn't have nothin' to do with it. We knows the guy that pulled it off. We spent last night with him and his pal and a scoit. He creased me here," and Charlie unbuttoned his clothing and exposed to view the bloody scratch of the Oskaloosa Kid's bullet. "On the level, Burton, we weren't in on it. This guy was at that Squibbs place when he pulls in there out in the rain, and he has a pocket full of kale and sparklers and things, and he goes for to shoot me up when I tries to get away." "Who was he?" asked Burton. "He called hisself the Oskaloosa Kid," replied Charlie. "A guy called Bridge was with him. You know him?" "I've heard of him, but he's straight," replied Burton. "Who was the skirt?" "I dunno," said Charlie, "but she was gassin' about her pals croaking a guy and tuning him out in a gas wagon, and this Oskaloosa Kid he croaked some old guy in Oakdale last night. Maybe he ain't a bad 'un, though." "Where are they now?" asked Burton. "We got away from 'em at the Squibbs place this mornin'," said Charlie. "Well," said Burton, "you boes come along with me. If you've done nothing, the worst you'll get'll be 3 squares and a place to sleep for a few days. I want you where I can lay my hands on you when I need a couple of witnesses," and he herded them over the fence and into the machine. As he himself was about to step in he felt suddenly of his breast pocket. "What's the matter?" asked one of his companions. "I've lost my notebook," replied Burton. It must have dropped out of my pocket when I jumped the fence. Just a minute while I go look for it," and he returned to the fence, vaulted it, and disappeared behind the bushes. It was fully 5 minutes before he returned, but when he did there was a look of satisfaction on his face. "Find it?" asked his principal lieutenant. "Yes," replied Burton. "I wouldn't have lost it for anything." Bridge and his companions had made their way along the wooded path for perhaps a quarter of a mile when the man halted and drew back behind the foliage of a flowering bush. With raised finger he motioned the others to silence and then pointed through the branches ahead. The boy and the girl, tense with excitement, peered past the man into a clearing in which stood a log shack, mud plastered; but it was not the hovel which held their mute attention. It was rather the figure of a girl, bareheaded and barefooted, who toiled stubbornly with an old spade at a long, narrow excavation. All too suggestive in itself was the shape of the hole the girl was digging. There was no need of the silent proof of its purpose which lay beside her to tell the watchers that she worked alone in the midst of the forest's solitude upon a human grave. The thing, wrapped in an old quilt, lay silently waiting for the making of its last bed. And as the three watched her, other eyes watched them and the digging girl, wide, awestruck eyes filled with a great terror, yet now and again half closing in the shrewd expression of cunning that is a hallmark of crafty ignorance. And as they watched, their overwrought nerves suddenly shuddered to the gruesome clanking of a chain from the dark interior of the hovel. The youth, holding tight to Bridge's sleeve, strove to pull him away. "Let's go back," he whispered in a voice that trembled so that he could scarce control it. "Yes, please," urged the girl. "Here is another path leading toward the north. We must be close to a road. Let's get away from here." The digger paused and raised her head, listening as though she had caught the faint, whispered note of human voices. She was a black-haired girl of 19 or 20, dressed in a motley of flowered calico and silk, with strings of gold and silver coins looped around her olive neck. Her bare arms were encircled by bracelets, some cheap and gaudy, others well wrought from gold and silver. From her ears depended ornaments fashioned from gold coins. Her whole appearance was barbaric, her occupation cast a sinister haze about her, and yet her eyes seemed fashioned for laughter and her lips for kissing. The watchers remained motionless as the girl peered first in one direction and then in another, seeking an explanation of the sounds which had disturbed her. Her brows were contracted into a scowl of apprehension which remained even after she returned to her labors, and that she was ill at ease was further evidenced by the frequent pauses she made to cast quick glances toward the dense tanglewood surrounding the clearing. At last the grave was dug. The girl climbed out and stood looking down upon the quilt-wrapped thing at her feet. For a moment she stood there as silent and motionless as the dead. Only the twittering of birds disturbed the quiet of the wood. Bridge felt a soft hand slipped into his and slender fingers grip his own. He turned his eyes to see the boy at his side gazing with wide eyes and trembling lips at the tableau within the clearing. Involuntarily the man's hand closed tightly upon the youth's, and as they stood thus the silence was shattered by a loud and human sneeze from the thicket not 50 feet from where they stood. Instantly the girl in the clearing was electrified into action. Like a tigress charging those who stalked her, she leaped swiftly across the clearing toward the point from which the disturbance had come. There was an answering commotion in the underbrush as the girl crashed through, a slender knife gleaming in her hand. Bridge and his companions heard the sounds of a swift and short pursuit, followed by voices, one masterful, the other frightened and whimpering. And a moment afterward the girl reappeared dragging a boy with her, a wide-eyed, terrified country boy who begged and blubbered to no avail. Beside the dead man the girl halted and then turned on her captive. In her right hand she still held the menacing blade. "What you do there watching me for?" she demanded. "Tell me the truth or I will kill you," and she half raised the knife that he might profit in his decision by this most potent of arguments. The boy cowered. "I didn't come fer to watch you," he whimpered. "I'm lookin' for somebody else. I'm goin' to be a detective, and I'm a shadowin' a murderer," and he gasped and stammered. "But not you. I'm lookin' for another murderer." For the first time the watchers saw a faint smile touch the girl's lips. "What other murderer?" she asked. "Who has been murdered?" "Two, and maybe three, in Oakdale last night," said Willie Case, more glibly now that a chance for disseminating gossip momentarily outweighed his own fears. "Reginald Paynter was murdered, and old man Baggs, and Abigail Prim's missin'. Like as not she's been murdered too, though they do say as she had had a hand in it, bein' seen with Paynter and the Oskaloosie Kid just afore the murder." As the boy's tale reached the ears of the three hidden in the underbrush, Bridge glanced quickly at his companions. He saw the boy's horror-stricken expression follow the announcement of the name of the murdered Paynter, and he saw the girl flush crimson. Without urging, Willie Case proceeded with his story. He told of the coming of the Oskaloosa Kid to his father's farm that morning, and of seeing some of the loot and hearing the confession of robbery and killing in Oakdale the night before. Bridge looked down at the youth beside him, but the other's face was averted and his eyes upon the ground. Then Willie told of the arrival of the great detective, of the reward that had been offered, and of his decision to win it and become rich and famous in a single stroke. As he reached the end of his narrative he leaned close to the girl, whispering in her ear the while his furtive gaze wandered toward the spot where the three lay concealed. Bridge shrugged his shoulders as the palpable inference of that cunning glance was borne in upon him. The boy's voice had risen despite his efforts to hold it to a low whisper, for what with the excitement of the adventure and his terror of the girl with the knife he had little or no control of himself. Yet it was evident that he did not realize that practically every word he had spoken had reached the ears of the three in hiding, and that his final precaution as he divulged the information to the girl was prompted by an excess of timidity and secretiveness. The eyes of the girl widened in surprise and fear as she learned that three watchers lay concealed at the verge of the clearing. She bent a long, searching look in the direction indicated by the boy, and then turned her eyes quickly toward the hut, as though to summon aid. At the same moment Bridge stepped from hiding into the clearing. His pleasant "Good morning" brought the girl around, facing him. "What you want?" she snapped. "I want you and this young man," said Bridge, in his voice now suddenly stern. "We have been watching you and followed you from the Squibbs house. We found the dead man there last night." Bridge nodded toward the quilt-enveloped thing upon the ground. "And we suspect that you had an accomplice." Here he frowned meaningly upon Willie Case. The youth trembled and stammered. "I never seen her afore," he cried. "I don't know nothin' about it. Honest, I don't." But the girl did not quail. "You get out," she commanded. "You a bad man. Kill, steal. He know. He tell me. You get out or I call Beppo. He kill you. He eat you." "Come, come now, my dear," urged Bridge. "Be calm. Let us get at the root of this thing. Your young friend accuses me of being a murderer, does he? And he tells about murders in Oakdale that I have not even heard of. It seems to me that he must have some guilty knowledge himself of these affairs. Look at him and look at me. Notice his ears, his chin, his forehead, or rather the places where his chin and forehead should be, and then look once more at me. Which of us might be a murderer and which a detective, I ask you? And as for yourself, I find you here in the depths of the wood, digging a lonely grave for a human corpse. I ask myself, was this man murdered? But I do not say that he was murdered. I wait for an explanation from you, for you do not look a murderer, though I cannot say as much for your desperate companion." The girl looked straight into Bridge's eyes for a full minute before she replied, as though endeavoring to read his inmost soul. "I do not know this boy," she said. "This is the truth. He was spying on me, and when I found him he told me that you and your companions were thieves and murderers, and that you were hiding there watching me. You tell me the truth, all the truth, and I will tell you the truth. I have nothing to fear. If you do not tell me the truth I shall know it. Will you?" "I will," replied Bridge, and then turning toward the brush he called, "Come here," and presently a boy and a girl, disheveled and fearful, crawled forth into sight. Willie Case's eyes went wide as they fell upon the Oskaloosa Kid. Quickly and simply Bridge told the girl the story of the past night. for he saw that by enlisting her sympathy he might find an avenue of escape for his companions, or at least a haven of refuge where they might hide until escape was possible. "And then," he said in conclusion, "when the searchers arrived we followed the footprints of yourself and the bear until we came upon you digging this grave." Section 12